friends, I am Vaibhav Srivastav from Vaibhav E-Learning Academy. Today we are going to start a new topic in biology, that is reproduction in organisms. This is our part number 1. In today's video we will be discussing about these topics. First one is lifespan. We will be discussing what is a lifespan. Then what is reproduction. We will discuss what is reproduction. Then we have the third point, that is types of reproduction. Then asexual reproduction, and then we will complete the video with vegetative propagation. So let us start the video. First question. So what is biology? Biology is about the story of life on the earth. So if you take an example of a species, we say that the individual in the sense each and every species, the individual dies, but the species continues for millions of years. So for example, if you take example of a human being, each and every human being dies, but still the species of Homo sapien is there for millions of years. How is that possible? Because there is a specific phenomenon which is involved in their life cycle, that is called reproduction. So first thing which comes in the topic of reproduction is lifespan. So what is a lifespan? So before moving on to lifespan, we know that in our earth, in our surrounding, there are many species, there are millions of species, and millions are yet to be discovered. So we basically say that we live in a diverse world. So we can say that there is a diversity of organisms. There is a diversity of organisms, but each organism has a starting time, that is birth point or birth time, and a death time. Each individual has a birth time and a death time. So what does this mean? That each individual has a birth time and death time, and there is a diversity of organisms. So these 2 points combine and say that there is a story going on. That for example, if you take a species example as Homo sapiens, so the species of Homo sapiens has started almost a billion years ago. As it started, new organisms are entering, they are taking birth, and then they are dying. But still the community of Homo sapiens, the species of Homo sapiens, is still thriving on the earth. So one more point here which we have to say is death is certain for all organisms. Death is certain for all organisms. But if you have to kill a species, or if you have to kill a whole group of organisms, the whole individual organism of that species, then that is done by natural calamities. So if there is a natural calamity specific to only that species or that genre of species, then only you can completely clear that organism, you can completely clear that species. So this was our basic points. There is a diversity of organisms, each individual has a birth time and a death time, and death is certain for all organisms. Now let us move on to the first topic of this video, that is lifespan. So the first topic is lifespan. So how do you define lifespan? What is a lifespan? So the time from birth to natural death of a species or of an individual is called a lifespan. It's called lifespan. So the time from birth to natural death of an individual is called lifespan. So this, for example, this is the starting time and till the end of the life. So from birth to death. And here we have to note that we are talking about natural death, not the death which occurs not naturally. So here what we are talking is a person is being born and till he is dying without any external any external influences, by the own natural death of the organism, then that time is called as lifespan. The lifespan is variable. Lifespan is different for different group of organisms. So the lifespan is different for different group of organisms. And lifespan is not dependent on one particular thing. So one example which is given, that if you take a crow and a parrot, crow and parrot are two species. Crow has a lifespan of almost 15 years and parrot has a lifespan of almost 150 years. So they both are similar in size. They are similar in size. But see the difference in their lifespan. The lifespan of crow is 15 years and the lifespan of parrot is 150 years. This is one example that lifespan does not depend upon the size. There is one more example given, that is an example of banyan tree and a mango tree. Even a banyan tree lives for almost up to 150 to 200 years, but a mango tree lives for 20 to 30 years. But both have almost the same size. So we can say one more point, that lifespan does not depend on size of an organism. It is not that if you consider there is a very big organism, its lifespan will be large. It may be large in some cases, but not usually. You can't say that it is specified. If the size is more, then the lifespan will be more. No, it is not like that. So this was all about the lifespan. So now this lifespan, so the lifespan is the time from birth to natural death of an individual. That is the lifespan. Lifespan is different for different group of organisms. And one more thing here, for example, crow and parrot. Crow lives for almost 15 to 20 years and parrot lives for almost 150 years. Banyan tree lives for 200 years. Mango tree lives 20, 30, almost up to 50 years also, you can say. This is just an approx. It can live up to 50 years, 70 years also. But still the difference is where is 50 years and where is 200 years. So we can say that size is not a factor which decides what should be the lifespan of an individual organism. So as here we have spoken about the term natural death. Now this natural death is also an exception in some cases. So one exception which is given, that is unicellular organisms. Unicellular organisms don't have a natural death. So the unicellular organisms do not have a natural death. For example, take a unicellular organism, example amoeba. No, let us take an example of an bacteria. If this is the bacteria, so if you keep on providing it food continuously, if it has the food, then it will never die. This bacteria does binary fission and it forms two bacteria. Then this also does binary fission and forms two bacteria. So these are endless living organisms. These unicellular organisms don't have a natural death. They die in very specific cases. They die only when there is abnormal condition. Abnormal condition, here some cases are, for example, shortage of food. Shortage of food. Second, sudden or drastic change in temperature, pH, etc. So these are some abnormal conditions. For example, there is a shortage of food. There is no food, then how will the bacteria or unicellular organisms survive? Or there is sudden or drastic change. So a large amount of change, a sudden change in temperature. If now this is also one case, but there are many unicellular organisms which can survive even in this condition. So if there is a shortage of food or sudden or drastic change in temperature, pH, what they do is they make a protective covering around themselves. That is called spores. We'll be discussing that in this video only, but later on. So these were some points regarding the lifespan, that unicellular organisms do not have a natural death. Now there are even types of reproduction, that is asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. But if you are taking the history of life on earth, how will you decide which organism had asexual reproduction and which had sexual reproduction? But before moving on to know what is asexual and sexual reproduction, how and what were the conditions in which the organisms reproduced. So if you look at the timeline of earth, now when the life on earth originated, which was almost 4 billion or 6.5 billion years ago, when the life on the earth originated, the lifespan, the time of the living on earth was divided into two parts. First part is unfavorable and the second was favorable. So this is from time t is equals to 0. So what this means is, when the earth was originated in the starting, the living conditions were unfavorable. So at these times when the species were there, the species at this time reproduced quickly. As the conditions were unfavorable, they had a short lifespan. So what they did was, as there is unfavorable condition, that you know that you are born now and you will die just after some time. So as the nature wants that the species should continue, so what the organism does is, as it comes to earth after getting matured, which is after some specific amount of time, what happens is it starts reproducing itself. And here it does not take much time to reproduce, because there are, in sexual reproduction you will learn one thing, that they need variation. And why do you need variation? Because as the organisms which perform sexual reproduction, they live on the earth for longer periods of time, and since they are living for longer periods of time, there is a major chance that the surrounding might change. So as the surrounding changes, you have to get adapted to that surrounding. But in these cases, when they have a very short lifespan, they won't even notice the change in the surroundings in them. So what they do is, they reproduce quickly and they perform asexual reproduction. Whereas when the time was favorable, then what happened is, first point that happened is, they had longer lifespan. So there is a difference between these terms. One is lifespan and one is life expectancy. So what is lifespan? Lifespan is this thing, the time from birth to natural death. And what is life expectancy? So life expectancy is, if you see the present conditions on the earth, and if there is a new species which has just been born, then for how much years will that species live, approximately, taken on an average. That number of years is called as life expectancy. So here they had longer lifespan. As they had longer lifespan, they reproduced slowly with less reproductive cycle. Here the number of reproductive cycles were more, so they have to reproduce in every small amount of time, and that too they reproduce in a large amount, in unfavorable. so that as soon as they die, there is a large amount of species yet remaining, which then grow up and then do their reproduction again. Thus, the species should have to continue. The individual dies, but the species has to continue. But in favorable conditions, they have a longer lifespan, so they reproduce slowly and they have less reproductive cycle, and thus they perform sexual reproduction. So this was all about the lifespan and the origination from the earth. So now we all know one thing, that death is certain for every organism. So as the death is certain, every organism has to continue its living on the earth. And how does it continue living on the earth? It does a specific function which is called as reproduction. So now we are discussing about reproduction from this much long time. Now we'll know what actually is reproduction. What is the definition of reproduction? So reproduction is a biological process. So here, reproduction. What is reproduction? It is a biological process in which the individual produces offsprings, or this is offspring, or progeny similar to them. It is a biological process in which an individual produces offsprings or progeny similar to them. This is called reproduction. Now the second question which comes is purpose of reproduction. What is the purpose of reproducing? The first purpose, which is the most obvious one, is for continuity. Continuity of species. And the second reason is for variation. Continuity of species and variation. Continuity and variations have two very different meanings. So first of all, what is reproduction? Reproduction is a biological process in which the individual produces offsprings or progeny which is similar to them. Similar in function, morphology, structure, physiology, anything. They should be similar to them. And the purpose is for continuity of a species or for a variation. So this was all about reproduction. Now there are some types of reproduction, and we usually classify them as three types. One is sexual, one is asexual, and one is vegetative. But vegetative reproduction is nothing less than an asexual reproduction. So what we say is, in types of reproduction, we usually classify them into two types. One type is asexual reproduction, and the other type is sexual reproduction. Now, this asexual reproduction, as we discussed these two terms, continuity and variation. Asexual reproduction focuses more on continuity rather than variation. And there is a very logical reason behind this also. And sexual reproduction focus on variation rather than continuity. So here these are the two types. Now in asexual reproduction, what we said is they focus more on continuity rather than variation. And what is the reason behind this? So asexual reproduction, if you notice the trends of asexual reproduction is done by the organisms which have a smaller lifespan, or they are very simple in nature. So the organisms which have a very small lifespan perform asexual reproduction, and as they are having very small lifespan, out of the billion years in the world, they just come here for 1 or 2 years or something. So their main objective is, as soon as they are entering this world, they have to mature and then they have to prepare for reproduction. And why do they have to prepare for reproduction? So that they can continue their species on this earth. So what they do is, they focus more on continuity. They focus more on doing reproduction. They have more reproduction cycle. So it means that at one time they'll produce a large amount of progeny. They'll produce large amount of offsprings here. And that is not that a species only reproduces one time. Asexual reproduction I'm talking. In these asexually reproducing organisms, they have many reproductive cycles. They reproduce now, it made so many species, after some amount of time again they start reproducing. So how much ever the lifespan of the organism is, they try to reproduce as much as possible so that they can continue their species. And why they don't show more variation? It is because since they are here only for a short amount of time, they won't recognize the changes which are happening, because the changes which happen in our surrounding happen in a lot amount of time, in centuries, in 100 years, in 100 years, in 1000 years, the changes occur, and the changes are so slow that their lifespan is very little as compared to the changes which are happening. So that is why asexual reproduction focuses more on continuity than focusing on variation. But in sexual reproduction, they focus more on variation rather than continuity. If you talk about sexual reproduction, if you see a plant, they reproduce in a large amount of gaps. So for example, they reproduce now, for example, if you take a tree, they reproduce some trees like mango tree in 2 years one time they reproduce, and some trees which reproduce once in every 5 or 6 months. There are some trees, or there are even some multicellular organisms or sexually reproducing organisms which reproduce once in 2 years, 3 years, or yearly once. So annually they have some cycle, some have monthly cycle. So these are the reproducing organisms of sexual reproduction. So because they have a longer lifespan, their lifespan is almost near 1 century almost. Like even if you see humans, their expectancy was 100 years, but due to the changing conditions it is up to 60 and then 50 years. So what here, as compared to these asexual organisms which are alive just for like 1 month or 2 months, or just even some are for 90 minutes, their lifespan is very low as compared to 50 years or 60 years. So they are most probable to come across the changes which are happening in our surrounding. So as they are living for a long amount of time, their surrounding changes, and as the surrounding changes, they have to adopt with the surrounding. That is why they show variation in their reproduction. So these were the two major types of reproduction. One is asexual reproduction and one is sexual reproduction. Now let us look about asexual reproduction in details. What is asexual reproduction? What are the properties of asexual reproduction? And some organisms which show what kind of reproduction. So let us see. So before moving on to asexual reproduction, there is one more small topic which is left. That is type of reproduction depends on. So how can you say that this organism is asexually reproducing or sexually reproducing? So the type of reproduction depends upon the first one, that is complexity. Second one, habitat. And the third one is internal physiology. Internal physiology. These are the three which is given in the NCERT book, but there is also one more thing we can say, that is lifespan. Well, these three are mostly certain. Lifespan is one thing which is not certain. So let us see. Complexity. So first of all, let me make one thing clear, that all the examples which are given here, all the factors which are given over here might have some exceptions. but we are taking majority of them. For example, if you take complexity, most of the lower organisms show asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction. Example, Monera, Protista. If you take some examples of species, Chlamydomonas, Eulina, these are the examples which do asexual reproduction. Second, we have habitat. So now, if there is a habitat where the life is supporting, the nature is supporting the life, then at that area you will find more sexually reproducing organism. But if there is an area where the nature does not support living, then there you will find organisms which are asexually reproducing. So we can take the example of Archaebacteria. Archaebacteria are bacteria which live in very unfavorable areas which are in the nature. In habitat, also one more thing is that there are some organisms which are reproducing asexually. For example, take an example of slime mold, or take an example of a fungi. Their reproduction changes with the change in habitat. Now for example, slime mold. So slime mold is a group in protozoans. It is a group in protistans. Protistans is a kingdom, and in kingdom Protista there is a group called slime molds. So slime molds, what they do is they grow on dead and decaying leaf, dead and decaying bark, etc. So when there is favorable conditions, they spread around. There are some slimy substances like slime, that's why the name is slime mold. They keep on spreading. But as there is a condition, since for example there is an unfavorable condition suddenly, for example there is a increase in temperature, increase in pH, shortage of food, anything, or there is a high temperature in the surrounding, low temperature in the surrounding, what they do is they form a structure. In slime molds, they form a structure which is called as plasmodium. They form fungi and slime mold, both form spores. Plasmodium is the slimy fluid which is going through on the dead and decaying leaf. So what they do is they form some spores. Then once the spores are formed, inside they do either sexual reproduction or they do rapid asexual reproduction. So for example, if you take a case of fungi, for example there is a crop. If there is a crop of rice or if there is a crop of wheat, if the wheat is infected by a fungi, wheat rust, if it is affected by fungi, I guess Puccinia, if it is infected, then what happens is it starts reproducing asexually. But once you are about to harvest that, it means that the conditions are unfavorable now. You are going to cut the crop, you are going to cut the source on which it was living. So what it does sexual reproduction. At the time of that sexual reproduction, it shows some variation so that it can live for a long amount of time. So these are some examples for habitat changes also. That lower organisms can shift to sexual reproduction. If the conditions are unfavorable. If the conditions are unfavorable, then the lower organisms might shift to sexual reproduction. Then internal physiology. What is internal physiology? It depends upon what is the body of the organism. So internal physiology, it means that sexual reproduction requires some specific organs. It requires some specific organ systems. And as we have read here, that most of the lower organisms show asexual reproduction. So if you take example of a plant, plants have the reproductive parts, that is flower and fruit. They are actually, you can say that they come under organ system. But here complexity, there are lower complex. For example, cellular aggregations, example sponges. If you take an example of tissue aggregations like cnidarians, If you take example of unicellular organisms like algae, bacteria, so they do not have a specific organ itself. How will they have a system of reproduction? Asexual reproduction, it is very fast and it is very easy. We'll discuss about that in a moment. But here, internal physiology, it means that how is the complexity of the organism. If it is a cellular aggregation, if it is a tissue level, it does not have the organs which are required for specific reproduction. It does not have the system which is required for sexual reproduction. So that is why the organisms which are not more developed, they perform asexual reproduction, and the organisms which are developed, which have organ level of organization, which have organ system level of organization, they have sexual reproduction. Then we have lifespan. As we are discussing from this long time, that if an organism has a short lifespan, its main focus is on reproduction, and if it has a long lifespan, its focus is on finding variation. Then these all factors, complexity, habitat, internal physiology, lifespan, these are majorly, we can say that. Now even in complexity, there might be some small organisms, there might be some small organisms which show sexual reproduction. There might be some large multicellular organisms which show asexual reproduction. But majorly, if you see, most of the lower organisms can shift to sexual reproduction if the conditions are unfavorable. Now these were the type of reproduction, on what factors it depends. Now let us move on to the topic of asexual reproduction and what are its factors. Let us see. So now we are going to discuss about the first type of reproduction, that is asexual reproduction. So now what is asexual reproduction? We are discussing from a lot of time. So let us first discuss what are the basic properties of asexual reproduction. First property is that single parent is involved. Only a single parent is involved in asexual reproduction. Then the second property is that it is fast and has less steps. The asexual reproduction is fast process and it has less number of steps. This is our second point. The third point is mitosis mitosis occurs while we are talking about asexual reproduction. Then the next fourth point is gametes may or may not be formed. Gametes may or may not be formed. And the next point is fertilization does not take place. Fertilization does not take place. So these are the properties of asexual reproduction. A single parent is involved, it is less steps and it is fast. Mitosis occurs, gametes may or may not be formed, and then the fertilization does not take place. And from the previous definition, we can also say that here less variation is seen or is observed. So these are the main points of asexual reproduction. Now first, what is mitosis? For mitosis, you need to understand about the chromosomal numbers in a cell. For example, there is a cell which has n number of chromosomes. And this n in humans is 23 pairs. There are 23 pairs of chromosomes in humans. So for example, there are n number of chromosomes. Then this condition is called haploid. And this is 2n, this is called a diploid. So this is haploid condition and diploid condition. What is mitosis? Mitosis is equational division. This will be learning when we discuss about cell cycle and cell division. So mitosis means if there is a 2n cell, then after mitosis it is 2n only. If it is an n cell, then after mitosis also it is n cell only. So mitosis occurs. And one more thing, there is another type of cell division called as meiosis. Meiosis occurs only during the formation of gametes. And here gametes may or may not be formed. In most of the cases, gametes are not formed. in one case where gametes are formed is the example of a honeybee. In honeybee, there are three types of bees. One is the queen bee, one is the drone, and one is the worker bees. So worker bees are infertile. They are not for reproduction. The queen bee does meiosis and produces 4 eggs. That eggs are haploid. And the drones are haploid organisms. So that egg, honeybee produces the eggs after mitosis they produce drones. And then this production of drones, this is another thing, that these drones go and mate with the queen bee later on. But here if you are seeing the production, or if you are seeing the birth of drones, the birth of drone is by gametes. But the gametes are also not fertilized. This is asexual reproduction, but still it is having a gamete. So there are some exceptions everywhere. Gametes may or may not be found. Then it is fast and has less steps. Because the lifespan of asexually reproducing organisms are less, they have less time to perform reproduction. So they have to do it fastly and they have to do it in easy method, less steps. Then mitosis occurs. Fertilization does not take place. Fertilization is one male gamete and one female gamete fuses to form a zygote. But here there is no fusion, there is no fertilization. Then less variation is observed. Of course, the variation is less because they have the main focus on continuity rather than having the focus on variation. So these are the important points about asexual reproduction. Now when you are discussing about asexual reproduction, there is one very important term which is known as clone. So what is a clone? So there is a term which is known as clone. What is a clone? When the progeny is 100% similar to the parent, then that condition is called as clone. When the progeny is 100% similar to its parent. And how is it similar? It is similar both morphologically and genetically. So after reproducing, if the progeny is 100% similar to the parent, for example, this is the parent, this is the progeny. You cannot tell which is parent and which is the progeny. Then that is called cloning. Cloning is making the identical same both genetically and morphologically. And one good example for this is monozygotic twins. Monozygotic twins are a good example of clones. So what happens is they are formed from a single embryo. This is the embryo, for example, which is fertilized. Of course it is fertilized. So what it does is it forms morula. This is the stage of morula. From zygote to morula, they undergo cleavages, which is fast mitosis. Mitosis, but very fast, is called cleavages. If the morula cells break down as this similar and they form two different morulas, and if they develop separately into blastocyst or blastopore, if they develop separately, then this morula and this morula have the same genetic identity and everything. So these are twins which are formed from a single zygote. So these are called monozygotic twins and they are said to be cloned. And there is a dizygotic twin that both are similar morphologically but they are not genetically similar. There is a genetic difference because they are fertilized by different sperms. So that is why they are dizygotic twins and this is monozygotic twins. Monozygotic twins is an example of a clone. So now let us discuss about the types of asexual reproduction and the organisms which do asexual reproduction. Let us see. So now let us discuss about the types of asexual reproduction and where are these asexual reproduction found, in which species are they found. So the first one is unicellular organisms. Now what are unicellular organisms? The organisms which have only a single cell and all the basic functions of life are carried out by that single cell. Then that type of organisms are called unicellular organisms. Now this asexual reproduction is seen in most of the unicellular organisms. Not all, and I am not saying only unicellular organisms and I am not saying only in every unicellular organism. I am talking that they are seen mostly in unicellular organisms like Monera, Protista, etc. And also for some of the unicellular organism, just the cell division is enough for reproduction. So here, as we are having unicellular organisms, so first let us talk about Monera. What is Monera? Monera is the group of bacteria. Now this Monera reproduces by binary fission. Now what is binary fission? So for example, take a bacteria like this. If you have to divide this, see binary, bi means 2. So this cell divides into 2 different cells. Note here one thing, that in the properties of asexual reproduction, there is one more property, that the parent is being cut or the parent loses some of its part to make the progeny. So here what is happening is the whole cell is dividing into 2 parts. Then after these cells, these daughter cells are matured, they again reproduce and form 2 different cells. So this type of fission, this type of asexual reproduction in monerans is called as fission. Now this fission is done in mostly favorable conditions. Now this was about monera. Second group we have Protista. Protistans. Now in Protistans also we do fission. The examples are, example algae. Now this is a controversial statement, algae also belongs to plant also. So instead of algae, here we have amoeba. Amoeba. Then we have Euglena. Then we also have Paramecium. So these are some examples which reproduce by fission. Now amoeba is irregular shape. Okay, amoeba is something like this. It also has pseudopodia. This we will be discussing. So this amoeba does, now this amoeba is very special case. This amoeba does fission. Here let me write. Amoeba does fission, and to be specific, binary fission in favorable conditions. Favorable condition. So what amoeba is? Amoeba you can cut from any plane. So this is the nucleus. From any plane you can cut into 2 parts. So this is called a binary fission. Similarly, if you talk about Euglena, Euglena mostly we can cut only in one single plane, that is the longitudinal plane. So this is called longitudinal binary fission. And if you talk about Paramecium, Paramecium you can cut like in this plate. This plate is called transversal plane. So this is also a type of binary fission. Now about Protistans, in unicellular organisms, Protistans mostly do reproduction by fission. There are examples of even spore formation. Some may even reproduce by formation of spores. Now this was about binary fission. Now there is one more important type of fission, that is called as multi-fission. So this was about binary fission. Now amoeba does binary fission in favorable conditions. So in an unfavorable condition, what does this amoeba do? This is one reproduction of amoeba in unfavorable conditions. In unfavorable conditions, amoeba does multiple fission. Now what is multiple fission? So suppose this is an amoeba. So these extensions which are visible over here like this, these extensions are called pseudopodia. So what it helps is, for example, there is a food particle over here. Amoeba cannot move on its own. What it does is, this pseudopodia, it tries to expand its pseudopodia and it covers it to the food particle and then it absorbs it. So this is the function of pseudopodia. Now usually it does binary fission, but if there is unfavorable condition, first what it does is, it withdraw pseudopodia. It withdraws pseudopodia. It means that it becomes something like this. So after withdrawing the pseudopodia, it almost becomes like a circular structure. Now after withdrawing pseudopodia, what this does is, this is the amoeba. Now it forms a 3-layer protection. So this center one is the amoeba, and these three, this black, blue and the black one again, so this are the cyst. This thing, this structure over here is called a cyst, and this process is called encystment. Let me write it again clearly. So what is encystment? The process of making the hard covering, hard protective 3-layered covering around the amoeba is called encystment. Now this happens when there is an unfavorable condition. For example, the temperature increases very suddenly, rapidly, drastically. If there is a pH change, suddenly the temperature fell down to 0 degrees or something, or if there is any prey which can kill it easily. So what happens? It forms a very high protecting layer around it. Then when it feels that the conditions in the surrounding are becoming favorable again, then what it does is, inside the spore only, so inside this spore, what it does is, it does multiple fission. It makes many small amoebas. This is called multiple fission. Then after some times, the wall breaks and all the small amoeba come outside, and then they again the small amoebas, the small baby amoebas, the offsprings, the progenies of the bigger amoeba, many are formed. This is called as multiple fission. And this total cyst, these are small amoebas, these are called spores. And the opening of the shell, the opening of the protecting covering is called as sporulation. Sporulation. And after the spores go at a particular point, if they find the good habitat for their growth, they again form the amoeba. So this is the life cycle of amoeba when there is an unfavorable condition. Let me explain it from starting. There is an amoeba which is living its life. Then suddenly it has everything. It has the food, it has its shelter, it has the perfect condition, it has perfect temperature. Suddenly what happens is, the conditions become unfavorable. This is very rare case, because these are asexually reproducing. They have a very short lifespan, and due to the short lifespan, they mostly won't be encountering such condition changes. But let us take an exception that the conditions become unfavorable. Then this amoeba withdraws its pseudopodia and it becomes a small circular structure. This circular structure then forms a 3-layered protection around it. This is called a cyst, and from amoeba to cyst, that change is called as encystment. Now when this cyst, it stays in the covering for a long amount of time. It can stay for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, unless or until the conditions become favorable again. They live inside that cyst. Once the conditions are normal once again, they start doing multiple fission inside this cyst. Inside the protection itself, they start doing multiple fission. and they produce small bodies called as spores. And once they feel that the surrounding is favorable for growth once again, they break open the cyst, and this is called sporulation. The spores then scatter here and there in the surrounding, and then they go and they reproduce and form, they grow back and form amoeba. Now here, from spore to amoeba, there is mitosis. So this is the life cycle of amoeba in unfavorable conditions. So you can see this, from amoeba it endorses pseudopodia, it forms cyst, then it does sporulation, and then it forms back amoeba. So the life cycle of amoeba in unfavorable condition, we can revise that in these steps. So first one is withdrawal of pseudopodia, then encystment, then multiple fission, then sporulation, and the spores which are produced, are called pseudopodial spores or pseudopodiospores. Pseudopodiospores. These pseudopodiospores go back and they regenerate to form amoeba. So they do sporulation and then they grow back. Form amoeba. So this is the life cycle of amoeba when there is an unfavorable condition. So till now we were discussing about asexual reproduction in unicellular organisms. Now let us see the asexual reproduction in multicellular organisms. Let us see. So now we are going for multicellular organisms. It is not like only unicellular organisms show asexual reproduction. There are also multicellular organisms which show asexual reproduction. Now in multicellular organisms, here we have an example of fungi, which mostly reproduces by fragmentation. There is a species of fungi which is called as yeast, and the yeast which we are learning is Saccharomyces cerevisiae. This is a organism which is unicellular. It is non-filamentous. And this is an exception to the fungi. This is a unicellular fungi, yeast, which is non-filamentous. It reproduces by budding. Now if this is the yeast, there is a small bud over here which again degenerates to form the whole new species of an yeast. So this is called as budding. Now fragmentation, it means that this is the fungi, some part of this and the other fungi, or asexual reproduction, some part of this breaks down and it forms into a new fungi. This is called as fragmentation. Now fungi has 4 groups. First is Phycomycetes, which is also called as Zygomycetes. Second group is Ascomycetes. Third group is Basidiomycetes. And the fourth group is Deuteromycetes. So these are the 4 groups of fungi. Now these groups of fungi, in this Ascomycetes reproduces by conidia. Deuteromycetes reproduces by conidia. So what is this conidia? Conidia is a unicellular haploid non-motile So as it is a non-motile, it is also an aplanospore and it is asexual bud. So this is about conidia. Now this fungi we will detailedly learn in the biological classification video, in which there is kingdom fungi. There are 4 groups: Phycomycetes, which produces Zygomycetes, which has zygospores; Ascomycetes, which have ascospores or conidia, they reproduce by conidia; Basidiomycetes and Deuteromycetes. So out of these 4, Ascomycetes is the largest group of fungi and Deuteromycetes. So the largest asexual spore is conidia. So here largest asexual spore is conidia. So this conidia is unicellular, it is haploid, it is non-motile, aplanospore. There are 2 types, aplanospore and zoospores. Zoospores are motile spores. Zoospores and zygomycetes both are different. Zygospores are different and zoospores are different. Aplanospores are the spores which are non-motile. They are asexual buds. So this is how fungi reproduces in an asexual manner. So now after this fungi, there is also an algae which is called Chlamydomonas that reproduces by formation of small buds. That is also an example of multiple fission. So this was about multicellular organisms, fungi. Now in this multicellular organism, there is one more group of multicellular organisms, that is kingdom Plantae. Now plant kingdom also reproduces in asexual methods. So before moving on to plant kingdom, we will discuss some asexual methods and some of the examples, and then we'll move on to vegetative reproduction. Let us see. So now we'll be doing a recap about asexual reproduction in unicellular and multicellular organisms which are other than plants. So first, here is the method of fission. Now what is fission? I'll be explaining each and every method once again over here in this space. Fission is, this is one organism which is breaking down into 2 different organisms, which is breaking down again into 2 different organisms. This is called binary fission. Now there is one more type of fission, that is multiple fission, which happens only in unfavorable condition. Example in amoeba, which we have discussed. So the example for fission is in Monera and Protista. In Monera, there are also some spores formed. The spores are formed in Monera only if there is an emergency, or same in unfavorable conditions. Monera also produces some spores. Then we have fragmentation. Fragmentation is by fungi. What is fragmentation? Small fragment of that. If this is the mycelium of a fungi, if you take one part out, this one part can regenerate to form its own fungi. So this is called as fragmentation. But in fungi there is an exception for a group, that is yeast. So budding occurs in the form in yeast and hydra. So what is a hydra? Hydra is a group for animal kingdom. From animal kingdom, it is a nidaria. So hydra, it is something like this. So these are called tentacles. Now this hydra, after some time, this produces a small bud over here. Now as this bud grows on, it will form into a new species, and this will get separated from this and will form another different species. Not different, same species, but it will be a separate one. So this is called budding in hydra, and yeast is something like this. So this thing comes out and becomes another species. This is budding in yeast and budding in hydra. Then we have gemme in porifera, or gemme in porifera. So porifera comes under animal kingdom, and this is the structure of a porifera. So this is how a porifera is. It is sponges. It has holes in this. So here there are some small spores. What over here happens is water enters through this, gets absorbed, and then the water comes out. These are called ostia. This is called osculum. This will be discussing in the animal kingdom in porifera. So here these are the spores, something like this. These have small asexual buds, and this is called gemme. Once these are mature enough, these gamma come out from inside, and then they go to the surrounding, and then they go and form a new species. So this is gemma, asexual reproduction by gemma. in porifera. Regeneration is by planaria. So planaria is also some species like this, planaria, Dugacia. So if you cut this much part of a planaria, so what happens is this part regenerates into a planaria and this part also regenerates its part back. So if you even cut this much part also, this small part can also form a new planaria. So this is regeneration. This is a member of a Platyhelminthes. Then zoospores, Chlamydomonas. So if this is the Chlamydomonas, there are small spores which get formed inside this. And these are flagella. Zoospore means they are motile. So once the maturation period comes, the spore breaks and the small zoospores come out and they form a new individual. So this is called as zoospore. And then conidia, which we have discussed. So here conidia, they have given an example of a penicillium. So penicillium is an example of an Ascomyces. Ascomycetes. So this is the penicillium, for example. Then what happens is here there are some spores produced. These are called conidia. When the maturation time comes, these conidia fall off and they make the new individual species. So this was all about conidia. And these are the main asexual reproduction ways in unicellular organisms and some multicellular organisms. So now let us move on to a special type of asexual reproduction, that is vegetative reproduction. And this vegetative reproduction, most of the topics from vegetative reproduction will be covered in morphology of plant kingdom video. So now I will be just writing the ways and the plants which are having this reproduction. So let us see. Let us again see about this. As we have already learnt about this in morphology videos, let us again revise these things from starting. So we have tuber. Tuber example is a potato. We have bulb. Example of bulb is onion or garlic. We have bulbil. So a group of bulbs together in a plant, in a single plant, is called as a bulbil. Example, agave. Then we have runner. So what is a runner? On a floor there is strawberry, grass or salix. So these are strawberry, for example. It goes front and again reproduces. Goes front again reproduces. Sorry, not reproduces. It grows into a fruit. So this is called as a runner. Example is strawberry. Then we have stolon. Example, jasmine. It goes under the ground and comes out. These things are detailedly will be explaining in the morphology of flowering plants video. Then we have a rhizome. Example, ginger and turmeric. Then we have sucker. Example, banana and pineapple. Leaflet. Example, raffinum, and comb. Example, colcasia. There is one more type that is called as offset. And this offset is a very special case. Now, offset is just like stolon but in water. One example for offset is Eichhornia. This is also called water hyacinth. This is also called as terror of Bengal. So, what is this Eichhornia? Eichhornia, let me explain this properly over here. Eichhornia it is actually a weed, plant weed, grown in water. So this is about Eichhornia. This is called as, first of all, terror of Bengal. This is called as water hyacinth. So what happened? So what is this Eichhornia? Eichhornia was a plant which was not grown in India. It was introduced in India as an ornament. So here it was introduced as ornamental plant. Its leaves were so beautiful and the leaves were purple in color and the flower was so beautiful that it was used as ornamental. It was imported to India and it was planted in stagnant water. So here one more point is stagnant water. So what it did was, it was an offset reproducing organism. It reproduced so fastly that it covered the whole water. What it did was, reproduces so fast covered the water. So if this is the lake, there are some aquatic fishes inside. So what it did was, this thing was spread all over the water surface. So what it did was, it blocked the oxygen supply. So if it covers the surface of the water, then the oxygen does not go inside, and what happens is aquatic animals died. So this is Eichhornia, or called as water hyacinth. So it is known as tenor of Bengal. It is also a water hyacinth. It was introduced as an ornamental plant in India because its leaves and flowers were so good looking. It is grown on stagnant water. What is stagnant water? Stagnant water is a still water. The water is not moving. So if you plant it, it reproduces so fastly. In 2-3 days, it can almost cover the 2-3 days or 2-3 weeks. It can almost cover the whole lake. So what it did was, it covered the whole lake. It reproduces so fast and covered the water, which blocked the oxygen supply. And if the supply is blocked, then no more oxygen reaches down, and the aquatic animals, aquatic plants, they suffered because of it. So this was today's video about asexual reproduction and vegetative propagation. So I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have enjoyed this video, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and we'll see you in the next video. Do share this video if you find this video informative. See you next time in the next video. Thank you and goodbye.